Welcome to the Accidental Pregnancy Speedrun. To start your run, we have the Wing It strategy. To get from point A, living your best child-free life, to point B, Googling how to swaddle, your absolute best move is to do nothing. I'm talking zero defense. No pills, no barriers, and no tracking apps. To master this step, you need to look modern science in the face and say, nah. Number one on your roadmap to success is to play the odds. In the US, 52% of all accidental pregnancies happen to people using exactly zero contraception. It is basically the undefeated heavyweight champion of oops. You also need to embrace delusion. To really nail this step, you have to adopt a specific mindset. About 33% of people skip protection because they think their personal pregnancy risk is low. But spoiler alert, it usually isn't. You aren't magical, you're fertile. And finally, lean into the fear because another 32% avoid birth control because they worry about side effects or costs. Are those valid concerns? 100%. But for our goal today, that hesitation is the VIP express lane to a positive test. This strategy is a crowd favorite, especially if you're under 20. The game plan is simple. Drop the shields and assume you're the exception to the biological rule, because nature loves a gambler. And if that felt a little too reckless for you, there's a sophisticated alternative called the good enough effort. To get from responsible adult to surprise parent, you don't need to abandon contraception. You just need to be terrible at using it. To execute this perfectly, you must master the art of user error. About 43% of unintended pregnancies happen to people using contraception. Why? Because they treated it like a suggestion, not a rule. Only 5% are actual method failures, and the rest are on us. So to ensure you fall into that 43%, you just need to follow a simple guide to typical use. Number one is to sabotage the condom. To unlock a solid 13% failure rate, simply treat the condom like a garnish and put it on halfway through. The statistics say 61% of users admit to the late arrival technique, and while better late than never is great for dinner parties, it's terrible for biology. Next is to ghost the pill. To hit a 7% failure rate here, you just need to be busy. The move is to miss a pill or two. Treat your daily alarm as a challenge. 38% of users miss a pill every 3 months, and among pill users who actually got pregnant, 76% simply forgot to take it. Consistency is hard, but pregnancy is way harder. Finally, play the guessing game. If you really want to roll the dice, rely on withdrawal or fertility awareness without the discipline, because failure rates with this reproductive roulette jump between 13 and 24%. The secret here is realizing that perfect use is for robots, which you're not. You're a busy human who forgets things, and in the world of reproduction, whoops is the only word that matters. Now that we've covered the method, let's talk about the demographic, because to speedrun your way from step 1 to parenthood, your best strategy is to be under the age of 25. If you can manage to be under 20, that's a gold medal, and youth is such a cheat code in our quest for conception, because it's the perfect storm where peak fertility meets peak I'm built different energy. Here's how the youth advantage works. First is the statistical sweet spot. Women age 18 to 24 have the highest rates of unintended pregnancy. So if you're in this bracket, congratulations, because you're the MVP. Then there's the invincibility factor. Remember the doing nothing strategy? Young people are the masters of this, since 21% of sexually active women under 20 use zero contraception, meaning they aren't planning so much as improvising. Finally, look at the efficiency rate. Even when young people do use contraception, they tend to have higher failure rates, which translates to being super fertile, possibly disorganized, and having ovaries that are ready to go. The numbers are brutal since adolescents make up only 10% of sexually active women, yet account for a massive 26% of all abortions. So just embrace the chaos and ride the wave of your early 20s because biology is rooting for you. And while your bank account is screaming, biology doesn't care about inflation. To really excel at accidental pregnancy, you need to protect your mind from dangerous things like facts. So it helps to avoid the burden of knowledge by keeping your educational attainment low because statistically, knowledge is the enemy of oops. If you want to keep those risk levels sky high, you should stay as far away from a diploma as possible. And here's why school is a threat to your mission. You face a double threat. Women who don't complete high school face a powerful double whammy since they're more likely to not use contraception and more likely to fail at it when they do, making it a 2-for-1 special on conception. And then there's the correlation. Study after study confirms that low education is an independent superstar predictor of unintended pregnancy. Finally, you have the nerd problem. Higher education correlates with better contraceptive knowledge and consistent use patterns, which is boring because who wants a planned life with spreadsheets when you can have a surprise gender reveal party you didn't ask for? Essentially, the more you understand how your reproductive system works, the harder it is to accidentally replicate it. So, skip class and trust your gut, and even though your gut is wrong, trust it anyway. We've covered age and education, but to really seal the deal, you need to look at your bank account and embrace the budget lifestyle. It turns out that preventing pregnancy is often a premium feature, requiring a subscription tier that you might not be able to afford. So here's how the poverty trap works in your favor. First, you hit the paywall on protection. The most effective methods like IUDs and implants often come with high upfront costs. So if you're low income, those options are frequently locked behind a paywall, meaning you're stuck with methods that are cheaper but much harder to use perfectly. Then there's the supply chain issue. Financial stress means you might not be able to afford that pharmacy run or the refill copay, resulting in 19% of women in poverty being contraceptive non-users because if you can't buy the ticket, you can't stop the ride. And don't forget the failure gap. Even when you do try, the odds are stacked against you, since women living under 200% of the poverty line have a 21% failure rate, compared to higher income women whose failure rate is only 10%. Basically, having money buys you access, consistency, and a calm uterus, while being broke buys you a distinct statistical advantage in accidental reproduction. But if being young or broke isn't your style, don't worry, because there's a surprisingly powerful strategy available for veterans in the room called the Back in the Game bonus. To unlock this, you need to be separated, divorced, or widowed, meaning you exit a marriage and cannonball back into the dating pool. This is where these statistics get wild, and here's why the formerly married squad is the dark horse of accidental pregnancy. First, you hold the gold medal of failure. You might think the teenagers are the chaos queens of contraception, but you'd be wrong, because separated, divorced, and widowed women boast the highest contraceptive failure rate across all age groups at a staggering 26%, which is a 1 in 4 chance of an oops within a single year. Next, you get a 10-fold power-up. One large study found that being single, separated, or divorced gives you a nearly 10 times multiplier on your odds of unintended pregnancy compared to married women. Specifically, an adjusted odds ratio of 9.66, which is essentially a statistical cheat code. Finally, the logic behind this is simple. Maybe it's the sporadic dating, or maybe it's the surely I'm too old for this assumption. But whatever the reason, 12% of this group skips contraception entirely. So if you're newly single, don't be vigilant. Just let your guard down and assume your reproductive system is on a break, even though it isn't. If you have already had an accidental pregnancy, congratulations, because you've unlocked the permanent buff called the repeat offender rule. To master this step, you just have to rely on the momentum of your past and do exactly what you did before. So if at first you succeed at an accident, try and try again. History loves to repeat itself, and reproductive history has the memory of an elephant, so here's why your past is the best predictor of your future. First is the double down effect. Having a history of unintended pregnancy nearly doubles your odds of having another one, which is like a loyalty program you didn't sign up for, but you keep punching the card anyway. Then there's the 50-50 split. You might think, well, I definitely learned my lesson that time, but the data says, no, since approximately half of all unintended pregnancies are repeat occurrences. Finally, look at the behavior trap. Research shows that experiencing a surprise pregnancy doesn't often lead to changes in contraceptive patterns, which translates to most people going right back to the exact same strategy that failed them the first time. It's like touching a hot stove, getting burned, and thinking, maybe the stove has changed. So if you've been here before, just relax because the odds are heavily in your favor. And lightning doesn't just strike twice since it has a preferred target. To really maximize your potential for accidental parenthood, you need to rely on the educational void and stay blissfully uninformed. So avoid comprehensive sex education at all costs. If you want to get from student to parent in record time, your best friend is an abstinence-only curriculum. And here's why bad information is great for our goal. First is the abstinence paradox. You might think teaching kids to just say no works, but the data suggests otherwise, since states that rely on abstinence-only education actually show a positive correlation with higher teen pregnancy rates. It turns out that knowing how to say no isn't nearly as useful as knowing what to do when you inevitably say yes. Next, avoid the comprehensive stuff. Real sex ed, the kind that teaches you about biology and mechanics, is a disaster for accidental pregnancy rates because federal funding for comprehensive programs reduced teen birth rates by more than 3%, which is a 3% drop in accidents we simply cannot afford. Finally, embrace the knowledge gap. Many people skip protection because they rely on science they heard in a locker room, like, you can't get pregnant the first time, you can't get pregnant in a pool, or you can't get pregnant standing up. If you believe any of these, congratulations, because you're the perfect candidate. The bottom line is that if your sex ed class involved a scary slideshow and a promise ring, you're already ahead of the curve, proving that ignorance isn't just bliss, it's a baby shower invitation. Finally, we arrive at the most subtle yet effective step of them all, called the whatever happens, happens mindset. To truly master the art of the accidental pregnancy, you must cultivate a deep sense of ambivalence, which isn't about trying to conceive, but rather about aggressively not caring if you do. Here's how the meh factor sabotages your protection. First is the motivation gap. Let's be honest, contraception is annoying admin for your body, so if your motivation to avoid pregnancy is weak, your defense will be too. The consequence is that people with low motivation are statistically more likely to choose lazy methods, since why bother with a medical procedure when you can just be careful? Then there's the no problem attitude. This is a trap because in some studies, over half of women using contraception admitted that if they got pregnant, it would be no biggie. This is the danger zone because while it's not a yes, it's definitely not a hard no, making it the reproductive equivalent of leaving your front door unlocked because you live in a nice neighborhood. Finally, we have the consistency killer. When you're ambivalent, you get sloppy, and low concern is a massive predictor of poor compliance, meaning you miss a pill, you forget the condom, and you just leave it to the universe. Essentially, strict contraception requires you to be slightly terrified of the alternative. So once you start thinking it wouldn't be the end of the world, you should probably start knitting because you're already halfway to the delivery room. We all know that the key to maintaining a habit is enjoying it, so we're going to burn that bridge and pick a method or doctor you hate. The mission is simple. Be totally miserable because if you hate your birth control, you won't use it. It's that simple. Here's how to weaponize your own annoyance. First is the grudge multiplier. If you aren't completely happy with your method, your subconscious will sabotage it for you. For pill users, if you're dissatisfied, you're 1.6 times more likely to skip a dose, and for condom users, it's even worse. If you hate the vibe, you're 1.9 times more likely to use them inconsistently, which is nearly double the risk fueled entirely by spite. Next, give the silent treatment. Pick a doctor who scares you, or at least one who makes you deeply uncomfortable. Because women who find it difficult to ask their provider questions are statistically more likely to use contraceptives inconsistently. The logic is that if you're too embarrassed to ask, is this supposed to hurt, you're doing this correctly. So silence is golden and fertile. Finally, embrace the side effects. If a method makes you feel terrible, keep using it until the inevitable rage quit. Since side effects are the #1 reason people stop protection, and that gap between I quit and I found a new one is exactly where babies come from. The goal is friction, because the harder, more annoying, and more awkward you make the process, the faster you'll be trading that prescription for a diaper bag. We've talked a lot about your bad choices, but for step 11, the most effective strategy is to let someone else take the wheel. To drastically increase your odds of an unintended pregnancy, simply be in a relationship where you lack control, which we call the saboteur method, or the scientific term, reproductive coercion. Here's the grim efficiency of letting someone else run the show. First, you grant veto power. To ensure contraception fails, you can find a partner who actively votes no on your bodily autonomy. The mechanism here is that it's hard to be consistent with a pill or a patch when your home life is a battlefield, so partner opposition becomes the ultimate barrier to consistent use. Then there's the violence link. The data start because women who experience physical violence from their partners are at a significantly increased risk of unintended pregnancy. And it turns out that fear is a terrible contraceptive. Sadly, there's the forced start. How you start matters because non-voluntary first intercourse is statistically linked to having multiple unintended pregnancies later in life. Step 11 is the dark side of the data. It proves that sometimes the fastest way to get pregnant isn't about what you fail to do, it's about what someone else forces you to deal with. For our final step, we aren't relying on your biology or your psychology, but rather on logistics. So it's time to play hard to get with your doctor. To guarantee a slide from protected to parent, you simply need to have limited access to healthcare because you can't use what you can't get. Here's how to set up an obstacle course between you and your birth control. Start by moving to the middle of nowhere. Geographic barriers are key, so if picking up your prescription requires a 45-minute drive to the nearest clinic, you're eventually just not going to go. And rural areas are fantastic for this strategy. Next, get tangled in red tape. Ensure you live in a state without Medicaid waivers or family planning or simply lack insurance, because financial barriers and paperwork are the ultimate mood killers for proactive health, meaning if it requires a fax machine, you aren't doing it. You should limit your menu. Make sure your local provider doesn't offer long-acting reversible contraceptives like IUDs or implants, which forces you back onto methods that require daily effort like the good enough effort. Finally, simply have a job. Clinics love to be open only when you're at work, so if you have time constraints or scheduling difficulties, the baby will schedule itself for you. So for the ultimate success, just let the system wear you down since red tape is your reproductive system's best friend.